He lived in the 15th century, whereas Milarepa's dates are, more in the 11th century. So 400 years passed, right? And you have this collection that Changnyeong Heruka puts together. Changnyeong Heruka is also was very prolific. He also produced biographies of Milarepa, biography of Milarepa, of Marpa, of Tilopa, Naropa, I think, drawing from different sources. So the main, for example, the main contours of Milarepa's story, primarily we get it from Changnyeong Heruka's account. There is enough evidence to say that Changnyeong Heruka's account is the result of 300-400 years of you could say 300-400 years of reflecting on what was the significance of Milarepa. So how literal the story given by Changnyeong Heruka to Milarepa's life, it's debatable, actually. So the basic story of Changnyeong Heruka gives is that Milarepa lost his father at a young age, and then him and his mother and sister were put under the care of the uncle, in consonance with the traditions of those times. A kind of male figure related to the family is responsible for the family if the main male figure pass away and the male child is not old enough yet. So this uncle became responsible. And the story goes that the uncle and aunt basically reduced Milarepa and his family into being servants of the uncle. And the uncle and aunt gobbled up all the wealth of the family. And that then drove Milarepa to desperation because the mother kept wanting him to do something to regain their position and their wealth. So that's the more common story. But there are older sources that tell the story of Milarepa that doesn't have all these details. For example, one biography that I'm looking at right now, in fact, the biography just starts with saying how Milarepa's father said to Milarepa, and there it's clear that they come from a well enough to do family, not wealthy, but well enough. So that the father said to Milarepa, even if we have a lot of wealth, even if we have a lot of property, without the wealth of Dharma, this is all kind of pointless. And so I shall send you to be educated in Dharma. And so it said that, then it gives a list of names, Milarepa studying with different people, receiving different empowerments, including studying with 2 or 3 Dzogchen masters. And it said that after training and studying with a number of teachers, then eventually, due to not very kind of strong reasons even, somehow he ended up going to Marpa. And then it is from Marpa that he primarily was kind of brought to ripening, so to say. And there was no particular emphasis on how he learned black magic and used black magic to harm his relatives as a revenge for stealing their family wealth. There isn't much about that in this other biography. And this other one is definitely earlier. Yeah. So Changnyeong Heruka's Songs of Milarepa, in some ways, I think we can understand that it has undergone kind of, rather than thinking of this as, just a straight up collection of Milarepa songs with Milarepa stories put together, I think it's more helpful if we think of it that this really represents a few hundred years of a group of people's reflection and relating to this figure of Milarepa and the teachings of Milarepa and the way that a community has kind of coalesced around this figure and the spiritual descendants of this figure. And so then you have these songs of Milarepa. And the songs of Milarepa, a lot of times, if you look, it's not always, but many of them are very clean. What I mean by clean is like, it's like, very kind of structured, right? And of course, in a romantic moment, we like to think, oh, these poetry just kind of spontaneously came out this way. But there are lots of editorial hands involved. To me, it doesn't diminish what it has to say. To me, I really relate to it as this is like the collective wisdom of the lineage, the way we talk about lineage. And in any case, in this culture, you don't emphasize, like the brilliance of an individual. Yeah, and it's almost like that's beside the point. It's the collective, which is the Buddha mind, that is coming through to us. That is what's important, so that the individual names and the individual hands involved are considered to be of secondary importance. Yeah. So that's a historical, how to read historical text point. You can take the person out of academia. You can take the academia out of the person, I suppose. I have retired, so to say, from academia. Got rid of the, pretensions and the pressures to publish or perish. Now just, saying things with no consequence, on the side. And so it's a much better, suits me better.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did Milarepa's dad or mother, did they know that he became a great yogi?
If you look at Changnyeong Heruka's account, then no.
Oh.
That they died before he became this person.
Oh.
Now, I want to argue that even within his lifetime, I don't think there was wide recognition of how great he was. Mm. He really belonged to that not genre, but that category of practitioners who shunned publicity, whatever publicity, without Facebook or Twitter, even in 11th century Tibet. He really represented the kind that would rather not be known. And I've said several times, if he did not have Gampopa as one of his students, then I think he would have been lost in obscurity into history. Because his closest disciples were all also very much, understandably, right? I mean, you're attracted to a teacher because in some ways, for the most part, many things about the teacher is recognizable to you. And so he attracted similar types who kind of didn't care to be known and just wanted to be free from, needing to worry about what people thought of them and all of that. They just wandered from place to place. So I think even in his own time, he wasn't necessarily great or perceived as such. And you even see hints in these later stories, like for the biography, the most famous one by Changnyeong Heruka. Again, 300-400 years later. Not that Changnyeong Heruka was pulling this stuff out of thin air. He was collating, collecting all the different accounts of Milarepa and coming up with a robust, I would call, a robust biography of Milarepa. And in many cultures, that's common. When I was talking about this in my Saturday series right now on the lineage masters, in the footsteps of the golden lineage, somebody, when I was talking about this, somebody compared it to, sort of a controversy that came up several years back, where one of the Nobel Peace Prize winners from Guatemala, her book, her kind of biography, autobiography, or the account of her life. Some people, in the spirit of some recent exposés, went digging around and said, well, this never happened to her. This never happened to her, and her answer was like, she's like, I'm writing in a different mode, right? Where it's the collective experience of the people that I'm writing. And so I'm sorry that, it doesn't fit the genre that other people are expecting. And maybe my mistake is I didn't make that explicit, but I did not operate from the position of lying, right? Or embellishing my story. So in many ways, like Milarepa's life story. Anyway, so back to Milarepa, even as I say in Changnyeong Heruka, who clearly wants to make Milarepa, kind of the guy, right? Even there, you can tell that based on what his sister, for example, said to him, he wasn't really regarded as quote unquote successful. His sister said, why are you like this? Like, why can't you be more like the other successful Dharma teachers? Yeah? It's almost like a sister saying, if your kind of Dharma practice signifies success, I don't know about that. I don't know if I will want to go for that. Even back then, in Tibet, and even I don't know, like some of you might be disappointed to hear this. There is the Buddhist equivalent, and that is in some ways kind of a dominant one even now. We have our equivalent of these mega churches with pastors, living in mansions, and us going, ooh, this is like, a great Lama, we have that, we do, even if we don't want to admit it. I mean, in part is because the Lama position in Tibet, right, from very early on got kind of amalgamated with the local chieftain position. Those two became one. And the most paradigmatic of that would be starting from the time of the fifth Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lamas sat on the throne, literally Dharma throne and king's throne became the same throne. Yeah, and that sort of became a template for how people imagine great lamas to be. Now, the fifth Dalai Lama didn't start it. The fifth Dalai Lama just kind of, was an instance where we could see that. It happened even before that. And then all the royal imagery that you find in the Vajrayana mandalas definitely contributed to this kind of this cultural transformation where, right, at the center of your secular world is also a Buddha figure. That the mandala, in the context of India and Southeast Asia, which is also very Indic, and by extension also in Tibet, the mandala is not just a spiritual term. Kings organize their courts according to the mandala principles. There's the king and the queen, and then there's 4 ministers of the 4 directions, and then there's the 8 ministers, and then there's the 16, and then there's the 32. In Southeast Asia, many kings in Cambodia, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, organize their courts according to the mandala principle. Milarepa kind of threw that out, you know, didn't, or at least didn't care for the trappings, and turn away from that. So again, you know, in his time and probably in our time, many people would not recognize him as having been great. So it cautions us, you know, to think about where are the essence holders of the lineage, you know? Where are they, and who might they be, you know? To me, Milarepa's life, an example, is a good one to say. Appearances is deceptive, of course, you know. So he didn't look very successful. Throughout this thick book, where, you know, stories are told about him, he was always like lacking in food and lacking in clothing, becoming very weak until he was, you know, passed out because there wasn't enough food. Even after, you know, he has mastered his internal state. Externally, it didn't. The signs weren't there that he was successful according to the world. And the Tibetans, for sure, love, you know, thrones and king imagery and power imagery. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Now, beside these historical readings and how to read historical texts, right? The other interesting part here is, at least for me, is to see how, again, the organic way in which teachers guided students. Milarepa guided this herder. In fact, Milarepa started by giving what we would call instructions on the mind, kind of pith instructions on investigating the mind, looking at the mind. He started off like that, and then only later introduced the steps, so to say, the 12 steps or 21 steps or 8 steps of Buddhism came later. He began first by having the boy kind of look directly at his mind. Of course, the boy didn't know exactly what he was looking at. But in some ways, you know, not having been indoctrinated in the seminary, in the Shedra, was good. Because, you know, as helpful as formal studies of Buddhist teachings are, they can also easily become just articles of faith, things to memorize. And then if you memorize them well, if you know how to regurgitate them at the right time, you fool your audience, you fool yourself to think, oh, I know the Dharma now. Yeah? But here instead, Milarepa starts with, saying to him, look at your own mind. Look at that, and then come back, So 119, that part is important. That part, what the boy said, right, in 119, again, I don't know if the boy said it or not, but these are actually what would be some of the typical introduction to nature of mind instructions. The boy reporting what he discovered would be what, a teacher might use to introduce mind to a student, especially this, it flickers and flutters, bounces and bounds, flashes and disappears. Rig, rig, tu, tre, tre, yawa, di. Especially this rig, rig, tu. Now it has become kind of like a colloquial way of, but also in a very direct way without using technical terms. It says, lamas will say, if you look at this mind, and then of course, when the lama says, when the teacher says, look at this mind, you don't really know what he's saying, like what mind, right? So you just going, okay, let me look, then you're like, wait, the one who's looking, is that the mind, right? Yeah, of course you have those questions. But that's what you're supposed to do. You look, you look for it, And then if you really look for it, it says, you will see how it flickers and flutters, bounces and bounds, flashes and disappears. And that is where you start. Then you get a taste of encountering the I. Milarepa's response to that is, the wonderful taste of candy so sweet. By hearing its qualities, you want to experience it. You can think all about it, but you won't have the taste. To experience the taste, you must use your tongue. But the boy is starting to taste what this is, because he accurately has described. Instead of like, oh, the mind is clear-eyed, mind is without beginning, without end, right? Instead of rehearsing these standard descriptions that you find in the poems of the great Mahasiddhas and all that, and this boy just like very directly said, I can see it, but and then I think I see it, and then it goes away. Then when I think it goes away, like it suddenly can become very strong. Then it fades. Like I see that, and that is how Milarepa began. Then 122, I think was where we were. 121, right, is when now he says, I'm going to give you refuge. And then he explains refuge to the boy, and the do's and the don'ts and all of that. But then after that, he says, now, so now you understand all these things. And then don't break these vows, don't break these training precepts. But then now, go do this. Go look and see. What was taking refuge? The body or the mind? And so then the boy, So then I turned to look and see if it was the mind that goes for refuge. If the mind is given the name, the one who goes for refuge, then it can't also be called mind. Mind, the one who goes for refuge. Not only that, if a previous mind is called mind, can you then call a later mind the one who goes for refuge? The mind at the time of being the one who goes for refuge then cannot be a previous mind or a later mind. So he's beginning to lean in closer and beginning to ask, who is it? And he says, but I don't remember my past lives, and I don't know what future lives I will take. Last year's and yesterday's mind have already ceased, and mind of tomorrow has not yet arisen. The present mind also changes in every moment. And Lama, but you tell me, you explain to me. At that point then, Milarepa says, the Guru who has realized the nature of selflessness, I respectfully supplicate with my 3 gates, to me and all the students to come hereafter, grant your blessings that we too realize the nature of selflessness. By your compassion, may we emerge from the object of self-clinging. May we emerge from the object of self-clinging, praying like that, caretaking herder, listen to me. This consciousness that clings to an I. If you look, you definitely won't be able to see it. So here, this I that we go around assuming on some days, asserting on other days, defending at all costs on yet other days. This I, it only exists if you don't look closer. It only exists if you kind of keep it blurry and stand far enough. A scarecrow can do its job if you don't realize that it is a scarecrow. It only does its job when you impute, when the birds impute upon, right, a stick dressed a certain way, set up a certain way, to be a person. If you begin to look closer, if you begin to look into it, then this I is less real now. By the power of meditating on Mahamudra, you'll see by not seeing anything at all. And more specifically here, not being able to find an I that persists through time. Not being able to find, in another way to put it, a singular cause that you can point to and say, that's me. When we say that anything that is happening due to many, many causes and conditions, how does that feel?
It kind of makes me have to pull back.
Say more. Pull back how? Who's pulling back?
Whatever's watching, I guess. There's a sense of pulling back. There's a sense of taking in much more information. I guess that's what I mean. Like I'm not so focused.
So what is the, let's put it this way. What might be a problem when we first kind of get it that every experience that takes place which presumably is due to an event that is happening, right? An event, right? In other words, a phenomenon, right? Which is what we call dharma. When it happens, right? It happens not due to one. So we say that often, right? And when we say that it is one, who is this one that we want it to be? First of all, this kind of unexamined sense of one thing caused this to happen. Who do we want it to be, or assume it to be? Me. Well, not me. You know, you, I. Right. And why do we want that? Why do we want that?
I think of a child who thinks that my parents got divorced because I wouldn't eat my vegetables, you know?
Uh-huh.
So they want to feel like they had some power in the situation, even
Yeah.
though they didn't.
And even if it was one that will plague them, right?
Right, right.
Or because of me, right? The world is a good place.
Right.
I mean, Donald Trump, you know, because of me, everything great that has ever happened, including, you know, God sending Jesus Christ, is because of me. Right?
Yeah.
In both cases, right? My parents got divorced because I didn't eat my peas. You know, I'm the reason God gave Jesus to the world.
Right.
And everything in between these two, right, is due to us wanting control,
Control, power.
desiring control. So this falsely imputed I, then it doesn't matter, you know, even when this I doesn't become I, right? Sometimes this I turns into you. You caused this, right? That's still control. You because you can point to and say you. That's a form of control, right? Right? This problem happened because of you. The Buddhist shines a light on that and shows that it is not I, it is not them, it is many, many contingently arising contingencies that resulted in what we call is. Right? What we call what is. So the Mahamudra or Dzogchen, whatever you want to call it, right? These inner mind teachings is leading us to see the mechanics of self-making and the workings of how suffering or dissatisfaction arise, how this afflictive emotions work. Yeah. Earlier in this process, we are taught to recognize afflictive emotions as afflictive emotions. And that's an important step. Because if you don't realize that you are under the power of afflictive emotions, then you wouldn't even think of doing anything about it. But the recognizing of afflictive emotions as afflictive emotions in and of itself cannot yet kind of solve the problem. And this is when sometimes in the songs of the Mahasiddha or in some tantric material, to kind of make this point, it will say things like good, virtuous acts, non-virtuous acts, they are both binding. You find things like that. But that's not to be taken literally or to be said to someone who's barely started the path. And in any case, at no time do you, if you're really understanding the nature of things, at no time will you go, doesn't matter what I do. It's always, it matters, it matters, it matters. But it matters not in a way that it matters that I eat my peas so that my parents don't divorce. If it matters in that way, then you are bound again. So it finally leads to, to the seeing how this I is really about a desire to control. Now, the desire to control is not yet a problem if there are things that are controllable. But the bad news is it's not controllable. In the Lojong class, I kind of looked at this a little bit. I said, for example, if we think about desire, So between the desire to quench thirst and the ability to quench that thirst, there's not much of a gap most of the time. So no problem. That kind of desire itself, it doesn't really bring suffering. And so Buddha wasn't so concerned about that kind of desire. The kind of desire that the Buddha was concerned about is the kind of desire where between the desire and the satisfaction of that desire, there is a bigger gap. The bigger the gap, the more frustrating the experience. So the frustration that lies in between these two poles, it's really where the problem is. So in Mahamudra, when it says, let desire, and in Dzogchen or any in Chan, Zen, this kind of inner teachings, when it says, let desire liberate itself, right? If you don't know how to hear those words, you might think it is saying, go ahead and satisfy your desire. Go ahead, satisfying your desire is not letting desire liberate itself. Or statements like, desire will exhaust itself. not that desire would exhaust itself if you just give in to desire. No, that is, you know, the analogy of like drinking salt water to quench thirst. It will not quench. But there's a way of leaving desire alone and it will exhaust itself. Like, right, you know, so you should not misunderstand to say, oh, is that how we solve samsara? We leave it alone and it will resolve itself. It will exhaust itself. No, samsara, as Kampopa said, you know, confusion will not exhaust itself. But nonetheless, you have statements like, you know, let confusion exhaust itself. But the ability to do that is based on really understanding what happens when we feed confusion and what happens when we try to get rid of confusion. Both getting rid of confusion and feeding confusion, both getting rid of desire and feeding desire, comes from the same place. Control. Control is based on the belief in I, the belief in single cause. So we come back to that point about, it's related to this notion of a single cause. And that's why the Buddhist way, or the Dharma, the Buddha Dharma, is not a tradition anchored on single causes, but on interdependence. Myriad causes and conditions come together, and momentarily some experience manifests or turns up, followed by the next and by the next and by the next. And so in that sense, it's quite, you know, magical, quite miraculous. But this magic, when it is not understood, can lead to a lot of dissatisfaction. So not controlling, right? Leaving desire alone, leaving confusion alone. The way to leave them alone is to see them for what they are. The first thing is, they are not I. They are not me, and they are not mine. Not me, not mine is the first step. And if you don't feed it, feeding it either by giving into it or trying to stomp it out, it does exhaust. Why? Because something that comes together due to so many causes and conditions, if you take out a couple of causes and conditions, if you take up, if a couple of the causes and conditions has run out its steam, then the rest cannot prop it up. Just don't renew. Just don't renew it. As in, let it expire, you know. So usually suffering don't just expire because we keep renewing it. You know, we keep bringing our samsaric library cards back, you know, and say, could you stamp another date on it, you know? We keep renewing it, you know. And that's feeding it. But if you don't feed it, you know, then it will feed upon itself. And then whatever feeds upon itself cannot perpetuate itself, you know, it will, when it's done feeding on itself. So then meditation, one reason for meditation is to develop the ability to not do things in that sense of doing things to feed, either feed by giving into it or marshaling all your energy to try to get rid of it, but to stay with it and let it exhaust itself. And in Mahamudra instructions, it says, when you have realized the nature of mind, when the introduction to your nature has been successful, and you see exactly this nature, then true meditation begins. And that's called habituation. And now you are habituating what has been realized. So to me, this is the flip side of saying what we just said, which is you develop the ability to stay with it and let it exhaust itself. To express it in different terms, it's to abide in this nature of mind again and again and again and again. Even if you have realized this nature of mind, you still can get distracted by, maybe I should do something. Maybe I should satisfy this confusion or this desire or this resentment. Maybe I should stomp it out. Choosing any of those two effectively is getting another expiration date, getting it extended and getting it extended and getting it extended and getting it extended. Instead of not, So in Mahamudra too, there's the expression of like not doing. Not doing. There's another word, manishikara. Ordinarily, it's a word that is with positive connotations, which is attentiveness. So normally in more general meditation instructions, it says part of what we're doing in cultivating the mind is to cultivate the ability to be attentive. For proper attention, to train in that, to develop that. But Mahamudra uses this expression, amanisikara, where a is a negation. That means non-attention, non-attentiveness. This is not said to contradict those teachings on how important it is to bring proper skillful attention to the present. But it is applying it on a deeper level to how to truly and once and for all be free from the push and pull of samsara. You have to stop feeding it. And in that sense, amanisikara, non-attentiveness, that means don't fixate. Don't renew it. Let it expire. It's like you see it expiring, Then often in the last moment before it completely expires, for whatever reason, you go renew it, because you're afraid. It seems like a loss of complete control, or a complete loss of control, rather than trusting, that let it expire, right? We renew it in the last moment. So in the Mahamudra, this term is used, non-attention. Here is talking about not fixating. You will see by not seeing at all. Same as what is being said here. You will see by not seeing at all. But this not seeing at all is not, so it's very similar. It's playing with words, because earlier on the path, not seeing at all is the cause of suffering. Yeah, by definition, right? Not seeing is the cause of suffering. But at this point, this not seeing is not the same as that first not seeing. This is like in looking and looking and looking and looking, in gazing and gazing and gazing, in looking and looking and looking at this I, which experientially I know is the basis for my experience of like, don't like, pleasure, pain, right? And when you look and look and look and see that there is nothing there, there's no single cause there to be seen, then I truly see. So by see, that I will see by not seeing at all, by the power of meditating on Mahamudra. You'll see by not seeing anything at all. In the meditation of Mahamudra, you need the ground, which is faith, devotion, and resolve. So what is the basis of practice of Mahamudra? Faith, devotion, and resolve. Faith and devotion here, I don't have the Tibetan with me to look up what the two words, but I suspect it is the words that, the commentary will say, like, faith is like to be inspired, to see something really attractive, and to say, ooh, I want that. So to have faith. And then devotion is sort of the one that will accompany you through the process, especially when you feel discouraged, right? You don't give up because you have devotion. Faith, I think, connotes more an initial attraction. And devotion is that which will sustain, and that should then transform into keeping the resolve. So this is also, put in another way, the refinement of our sincerity, our intentions, refining intention, developing sincerity with regards to the practice. To sincerely, to refine intentions, to refine our sincerity. So we need faith, devotion, and resolve. And that is the ground. Then, the ground being established, then on the path, please know the causality of samsara, which is the method, which is the path. The practice is knowing how samsara came about. So it relates to cause and effect. But even deeper than cause and effect, or maybe not deeper, but the other side of cause and effect is the process of self-making and how self is produced out of a delusion, out of a confusion, and then, right, the consequences of letting this deluded self believe that it is real. So that consists of the path. Then to actualize the final fruition, you will need the Guru's empowerment, transmission, and pith instructions. Here, empowerment is not the ritual. The ritual is just an occasion whereby empowerment could happen. Transmission is like the life force of the practice coming to us. Pith instructions are the instructions that come from experience. To be a suitable vessel for those, one needs to have the accumulation of merit. And so you need to build up merit and maintain resolve through both pleasure and pain, persevering even in the face of death. Can you practice like this, my dear young son? If so, you have a karmic propensity. If not, there is no need to explain any further. Again, you should carefully think this over. If you can't find this I that you cling to, then that in itself is the selflessness of persons. If you want to realize the selflessness of phenomena, which is a more subtle level of selflessness, then follow me for the next 12 years. If you do that, you'll come to understand mind. My dear boy, work with mind like that. Even with Milarepa as your supreme guide, he says, follow me for 12 years. 12 years? I have to think about it even if it's a 12-week course. 12 years, come on. Don't you have a faster way, you know? The boy says, no, I can. I will do this. Then Milarepa thought, okay, let's see if he really can or not. So he began now. Meditate on the form of the Buddha just in front of your nose. Thus, giving him this instruction on shamatha meditation with an object, Milarepa sent him off. We find out that that he was able to do that. Got the father really worried. So just that kind of instruction, simple, no complicated chanting, no complicated this, that, next step, this step, that step. Just each time just gave him a little bit. And the boy took it, and did it. Then later taught him about karma, cause and effect. This is page 124. And finally gave him teachings on co-emergent union and have him practice that. Perfectly pure meditation arose in his mind stream. The guru was greatly pleased. Yeah. So anyway, we can unmute ourselves and chit-chat a little bit. Feels a little weird when we're all muted, but we're small enough a group.
I have something to add to what you were talking about previously. We were talking about control, wanting to control, and renewing the library card of samsara.
Uh-huh.
I was thinking of it in terms of, I guess I was thinking of it in terms of the negative way, I was thinking of running away from your suffering, you know, because samsara is suffering, and one way to try to control it is to always just run away
Oh
from
yeah.
it.
Oh yeah.
That's why the distraction is so tempting.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Because when you run away, then that's even, I think, at the very early point, not yet at the Mahamudra point of leaving it alone. That is from the not recognizing, right? So first you have to recognize, you know, what the afflictive emotions are. You know, first you have to see samsara as samsara. And most of us are still there, actually. Because each time you get close to seeing samsara as samsara, right? Each time you get close to the source of the stench, right? A new scent called samsara is brought to the market.
The way, so in my mind, I'm thinking the way for it to liberate itself is to stop running away.
Oh, the first step, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, to recognize. When you get close to the stinky smell, don't turn around. It's easier to turn around because samsara likes to sell things, you know, so something else will be sold to solve the stench, to distract you from the stench. So that's the first step. Yeah. So first noble truth. Dukkha that is to be recognized. Right? Each of the noble truth has a verb. Crucially important are the verbs associated with the noble truths. People just talk about the noble truths a lot, but they don't become noble until you apply the verbs. With regards to the first noble truth, we have to recognize. We have to see. With regards to the second noble truth, you have to abandon. With regards to the third noble truth, you have to experience. With regard to the fourth noble truth, you have to develop. So the first one, with regards to the first noble truth, is to see, to recognize.
Wow, that's great. What about this? What about abandon? I mean, do you want to say more about that?
Well, what is the second noble truth?
Cause and effect.
No, that's not second noble truth.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know.
What's the second noble truth?
Impermanence.
No.
I don't know. Don't ask me it.
Oh, you have to know, you know. The
I do know.
Noble truth, the first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering. Second noble truth is the noble truth of what?
Desire.
Causation.
I said cause and
Word,
effect.
yeah? Causation of suffering. What causes suffering? Grasping, craving, thirst. That have to abandon.
Desire.
What's the third noble truth? Cessation. Cessation of suffering. That has to be experienced. What's the fourth noble truth? Path. The path has to be developed. Has to be cultivated. Developed in that sense, not, you know, embellished, not decorate, you know, but developed, unfold within us.
Where do you think intention sits into all of this? You know, you can have confused intentions. You can have intentions that are motivated to further awakening. Seems to be part of cause and effect by many causes, many effects, and yet it's your own attention, but you're not really can't say it's your own in some sense. So whenever I start thinking about,
Don't think about it.
yeah, well, there's not much you can do with it almost, but
Yeah, don't think about it.
but um,
If you really want to think about it, then I will send you to the Gelugpas.
well, no, anything.
Yeah. No, they're good. They're good. I mean, if you want to think, in a very clear way, they're very good at teaching that. I'm not
It's not my strong
sending
suit.
you there as a punishment or, or demeaning them. But really, I mean, if you want to learn how to think clearly in the Buddhist style, go to the Gelugpas. Very good, Milarepa's way is to say, here is where you think about intention. Outside of this context, don't think about intention. So what context?
Right.
When you are meditating on developing sincerity, or in Tibetan language, Tibetan expression you find in Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about motivation, right? And then they talk about bodhicitta. But now I'm using more vocabulary from my own cultural background. In Chinese Buddhism, they call sincerity of intent lies at the root of the path, they say. So I think that communicates, brings some freshness to this talk about motivation. I think the Tibetan approach sometimes is so clinical it can be. And in part, it comes from the Gelugpa clarity of, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6 right. Divided into 8 parts, 8, So that kind of, and even Kagyu Nyingma Khenpos are educated in that way, right? So then when they come and teach, it has a function, but we mistakenly think the function is in our day-to-day life. No, it's for some other purpose. Then we have these expectations that your experience is going to unfold in that way, which I can guarantee you it doesn't unfold in that way for anyone. A lot of people walk around thinking one of these days it's going to unfold this way for me. 40 years later, you're like, still hasn't happened yet.
God.
Then you think, oh, because not enough merit. Oh, it's mistaken, Anyway, right? So sincerity of intent. So when we're developing bodhicitta, right? There we think about intention, yes. There we refine our intentions. There we refine our sincerity, right? And that sincerity, right? Bodhicitta, remember, bodhicitta is not just compassion. For bodhicitta to be bodhicitta, first you have to develop the sincerity of, I don't want to be caught up in this cycle again and again and again and again and again. I am done. I really am done this time. Well, until next time, which is sometime tomorrow. Then you have to come back and kind of work on that.
Right.
When we work on that, right? Really, when we work on that, again, when it's taught in the seminary, when it's taught in the Shedra, right? They will say things like, okay, and then now you need to like turn this into the Mahayana. Otherwise, you'll get stuck in the Hinayana. Again, I don't think it happens like that. It happens in a more organic way, which is when you begin to see the burden and the heaviness of your confusion, you will begin to see, if you train and probably guided in that kind of training, you are actually already developing very naturally towards the Mahayana, so to say. That it will come without a choice, like, wait, is it even possible that I just like get out myself and then the rest are left back there? No. Now, of course, it also comes with the understanding that we're not saying that you can like literally get them out. That also cannot happen. If that was possible, Buddha Shakyamuni would have extended, right, that niceness to all of us, right? But in order to achieve what Buddha Shakyamuni achieved, you know, our own intention and sincerity has to magnify beyond I, me, mine, right? And that has to happen. So all of this will progressively kind of transform. So when we think about intentions, we think over here in the Kagyu way, right? Which of course not exclusive. You know, I'm not saying it is not in that way, it's not in that way. What I can say is, like in the Kagyu understanding, the early Kagyu, in fact, later Kagyu, they got into scholasticism, they got into, you know, building structures, building systems, all of that. You know, it's part and parcel of the history for sure. But in this early, you know, especially like in the material and Sangyong Heruka and Milarepa, you'll see that, you know, they're like, we don't do those things. You got to go to the other guys to study those things. Yes, Karen, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I really liked what you were saying about the sincerity, and, you know, reminds me that I have to stay, you know, focused, concentrate when I'm doing this stuff. Just like this morning, you know, I just kind of ran through it. And if I'm going to spend the time running through it, well, I might, you know, they say like do, you know, 120 on your, you know, on your mala, because you're going to have so many that you're not concentrating on, and then you might get the 108. And that's kind of like the way, you know, that I felt this morning.
Yeah.
But I was just nothing. I mean, everybody knows that. I mean, what I feel like about the intentions is that's kind of how I start my day.
Yeah.
And then I have to do the action, you know, during the day.
Right.
That's
right.
that, you know, I mean, we all know that. I really loved everything you said.
Yeah. So, so in terms of, you know, when we do talk about intentions, when we do talk about desire, right? In that sense, yeah, it's desiring to achieve, right? In this, put it in this context, this is how we use desire and intentionality, right? Outside of this context, we say, if you keep thinking about it, the Buddha called it, you will end up with a thicket of views, a thicket of opinions, a thicket of concepts, and then you get completely tied up, you know, like going into a bush of brambles, you know. Oh my God, it's just so painful and stuck, you know. So a thicket of views, abandon that.
That's, I mean, in my experience, I mean, that intentions become a little more clear or something when you've made a relationship with a teacher and started getting a flavor of devotion, and
Yes.
And through that experience you have renunciation, because you say, oh, that's what that's like. And so it's like, that's what you want more of. And then that in itself, that's the direction of your intention.
Right.
But I was just, it gets very heady if you kind of said, well,
Yes.
who's intending what here, you know,
Yeah.
and why.
Now, sort of like to purify, if there was any negative karma, you know, of saying I'll send you to the Gelugpas, I think the way, if you want to follow the Gelugpa way, yeah, it gets very heady, right? But join it to what you just say, then you need to have devotion to the Dalai Lama. He is the supreme example of how the Gelugpa way can work. There's a lot of very disciplined thinking with categories, you know. But you see, you know, how he has been able to handle the 5 bazillion problems that turn up every day on his table. He is the only, I think, public figure that has continuously been on this fishbowl and no scandals, secular, spiritual, whatever, with that intense scrutiny. And it comes from, you know, when he says, you know, he does 4 or 5 hours of practice every day, I don't have absolute certainty, but I can tell you it's actually very different from Kagyu practice. His is going through categories, the Lamrim, right? 3, the first of the 3 has 7 parts. He goes through all of that, but with sincerity. See, bottom line is sincerity. With sincerity, it will work. With sincerity of intent, even if it is a system that, you know, it's like with sincerity of intent, you know, practicing calculus will lead to results. But I cannot bear the thought of, you know, doing calculus. So I don't, you know. Don't get me wrong, you know, I'm not saying the Gelugpa way is for people who just like to think, you know, but it can transform you if you have sincerity of intent. And so then that method, you know, has produced someone like His Holiness, you know. But it's not, you know, I mean, it's not what I'm capable. It's his ways, you know, that kind of analysis, and that, you know, at one time I was attracted to that, but now it's like, no, I'm understanding more and more. It's kind of the early Kagyu tradition and what made them kind of unique in their own way. And I'm like, there's a reason why I'm Kagyupa, you know. Now I know why. It's more about, and I find it like close affinity to like forest tradition in Thailand and the, you know, early Chan Zen tradition, you know. It's all very kind of heart-based, yeah, and also very direct, you know. Good to know your categories, but don't need to, you know, get too stuck in it unless you need to instruct people. Then you have more tricks in your bag. Good. But if it is your own training, no, don't mess with so many of those things.
When you were mentioning at the beginning, you were mentioning the sort of who are the Milarepas of our day.
Yeah, yeah.
You asked that question. I thought of Nam Tupten. Would you say he sort of fits that?
I don't know much about him. That's the thing. Yeah, I don't even know what he's doing these days. I only know an earlier version of him. I mean, even that is from afar.
Okay.
No, I think I'm not even thinking of anyone at all. You know, I'm more saying there are these individuals, you know, and if I'm thinking, if mentally when I say that, I actually in my case, I'm thinking of these nameless, but I know they're there because, you know, we have some of these retreat places in Lapchi. I think Mingyur Rinpoche went up there when he disappeared, you know, like apparently the Drigong people knew exactly where he was. He was in one of our, you know, huts up there. He eventually wandered up that way because, you know, it's hard to get to and nobody's going to bother you up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these people are there, you know.
People up there, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then from time to time, like the last bit of fame before they disappear, right? On Facebook, you just recently I saw like there were 3 monks, you know, not that old, you know, but basically resolved to seal themselves in for the rest of their lives. And so like a last hurrah, you know, that they may cut out offerings to their teachers and everything. And they have gone, you know, like they will never leave, you know, that house, little house that they've built for themselves. And you're like, wow, you mean you don't want to come and go on the teaching route? We could organize something for you, you know? I'm like, no, I'm done, you know?
I have 2 questions off the subject. One is, one of them I forgot. Oh, I know. One of them is in the New York Times yesterday about the fight between India and China. You know, over that land.
Yeah.
And when I was somewhere, I was real close to that area because they were talking about a big train that they were, you know, planning a big, huge train through the whole thing so they could get from somewhere to somewhere. It's pretty interesting to think about what could happen with that. And then my other question was, I mean, y'all, it's off the subject, but it's, you know, do you think people are going to be traveling next year?
If only I know definitively, I will be very successful.
I know. Well, I want you to get your Kagyu voodoo. Kagyu voodoo.
No, the Kagyu voodoo even will say, you know, these things don't really matter. It's the Nyingma Mojo that is more famous for these things.
Oh, well, then the Nyingma.
Oh yeah, the
I
Nyingma
like that
Mojo.
one better.
Yes, it's more like, you know, magic that will happen that will lead to something happening, you know. The Kagyu is more like, you know, whatever happens, you know.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, who knows? I think I certainly, you know, like, so now is the post-session standing around, milling around coffee equivalent of Zoom, I suppose.
Right. Because it is 12:30.
Yeah. And so I certainly, you know, I'm looking forward to like the rest of the world, you know, allowing us to go to them. Right now, we have turned into, you know, we have fulfilled. He insulted the other countries as bleep hole countries. I think we are that bleep hole country now. Nobody wants us, you know. Even Canada and Mexico have sealed the border and said, you'll stay back over that way.
Get out of here.
Built the wall.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like now the other two countries
now.
bordering us, you know, they're like, yeah, build the wall, please.
Yeah.
We don't want your crazy people to come over here. Yeah, China and India, you know, I mean, fundamentally, I do think, I don't know, maybe people say I'm prejudiced, but fundamentally, I think that Chinese have no real interest in military escalation. A lot of times what Chinese government is doing for domestic reasons, you know. Just like a lot of times, you know, when American politicians do things, you know, it's about re-election. For China, it's not re-election because they don't elect their leaders, but it is internal struggles within the Communist Party. They project a united front to the world, but there are all these factions that are invisible to the outside world. But to any Chinese person who is interested in these issues, if you talk to them, they will tell you. Of course, different people will tell you different things, but fundamentally, what everybody with an interest towards these issues will tell you, there are so many factions within the upper echelons, and everyone is trying to knock the other person off. So like it's escalating on the border, right? It doesn't mean that everyone in control wants that to happen. It's just one side of the struggle trying to kind of create problems for another side of this problem. I don't know that for a fact, but I know each time something happens, right? And the presses of the world report, oh, China, ... I'm like, yeah, it's one segment of China doing things probably to piss off or to entrap the other side. So I'll give one example that I don't know it as a fact, but I can give you as an explanation that I've been given from a Chinese friend who is completely like into Tibetan Buddhism, lives in the West, but a Chinese citizen, very articulate, has a PhD in, medical field and all that. And so with all the things that are happening in Hong Kong, right? Or before COVID-19, especially all those protests and everything, she said that she said, oh yeah, while the rest of us are talking about, the things that New York Times talk about or Washington Post, or if you are into Fox, Fox is talking about, but the conversations going on among, Chinese people is not any of those things. Instead, she said, well, there are two factions. Xi Jinping, the president, is one faction. But places like Hong Kong, Shanghai, where the economic center of China, and the areas associated with the economic powerhouses of China, they are still in the hands of this other faction. So Xi Jinping is agitating and even wanting unrest to happen in these economic centers so that he can wrestle away control from the faction that is have their hold on these areas. So he's actually happy that there's turmoil in this area, because then he can step in and say, you guys cannot control these areas, and it's how he's going to consolidate his power. So they see it in completely like domestic terms, more so than us. I mean, of course, a lot of what, when Trump says some stupid things, I mean, part of it is just stupid, but the other part, right? He's thinking in terms of re-election. So China, so I don't know. I'm encouraged by, I think, like China. The pattern of Chinese history for 5,000 years and now is, for the most part, they're not interested so much in starting wars. They're interested in making money. So the China-India issue is more, I think, a domestic. There's some struggle going on. So when in doubt, go start some problem on the borders. There's a Chinese saying, which is a very weird saying, kill the chicken to intimidate the monkey. I don't know how chickens and monkeys are related, but
Does that mean to get them off of that subject and onto it, like Trump?
no, it's not that. It's
No.
actually there's a relationship. It's like, in order to keep the monkey in line, I guess monkey kind of misbehave. You kill the chicken and to warn the monkey.
Oh, I see. Retaliation.
No, threat.
I don't know. Never
Threat.
mind. Never mind.
Yeah, you threaten the
Go
monkey.
next. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
All
So,
right.
as an example, right? You kill the chicken to threaten the monkey. I guess the example there works because chickens. There's an abundance of chickens, compared to monkeys. Who knows? Anyway.
All right.
Next Sunday I think I can meet, but sometimes things just kind of happen and maybe not. You all be good and ta-ta.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank
right.
you.
Wait,
We still have to finalize retreat plans. So I did not, well, I forgot. I was going to say I did not forget. I forgot, but let's figure out what sort of possible retreat plans that we can offer. I know that, let's see, very quickly. Yeah, I know I have 2 of these. So now these days, right? I think we have to think in